Debi Pearl, wife of Michael Pearl and co-founder of No Greater Joy Ministries, is one of the people who, along with her husband Michael, co-wrote the horrific book To Train Up a Child, which is, quite literally, I'm not exaggerating, an actual guide to child abuse. Debi on her own also wrote a number of marriage advice books like Preparing to be a Helpmeet, Created to be a Helpmeet. You get the idea. Basically, they all look at why abuse is totally normal in marriage and why it's probably your fault. She also attempted to write a book on neuroplasticity in which she has a very basic understanding of neuroscience that she then completely twists by adding this like weird biblical analysis of it, and then she misunderstands some other things, and then she gets really offensive with other things and tries to turn all of that into a child rearing manual. She talks about how vaccines cause autism is a disease to be cured, and all this sort of stuff. It's bad. We looked at it a little bit on a live stream a couple of weeks back, but that's not what we're talking about today. Debi has also attempted to write fiction. Just one book, mind you. This book here is her attempt at that. This is The Vision by Debi Pearl, the first book in the Last Publishers series, except she didn't write the rest of the series. This is all we got. And I think there's probably a very, very good reason we didn't get any more books, because you guys know I cover a lot of bad books on my channel, right? Bad fiction, non-fiction, bad poetry books. I think, without a doubt, this is the worst book I've ever read. It's not only badly written and badly structured with really unlikable characters, but it's also offensive to pretty much everyone you can think of. Every race, every religion, every age, every lifestyle choice, every human. It's like she goes out of her way to offend everyone. It's a lot. I actually covered the first 100 pages of this book in another video, and I thought, you know what, that's enough. What more is there to talk about? We've covered all the harmful bits, we've covered the themes, this is kind of enough. How much worse can it really get? But for the last 2 years, you guys have been asking over and over and over for me to cover the rest of this book. So I picked it up thinking, can I make any more content out of this? Yes, I can. Because believe it or not, this gets worse. This gets so much worse. Since it's been so long since I made that first video on the first 100 pages, you can either go and watch that original video if you want, but I do know it is long. So, if you haven't seen that one before, or you saw it but it was a long time ago, I stitched together a little 20-minute summary of basically the plot of the first half, well, the first 100 pages of this book. It's not like analysis filled, it's not in depth. If you want that, still go watch the original video. But if you just want a refresher, here's that coming up. But if you want to skip this because you've already watched the other video recently, or you kind of know what's happening in the plot, or you just don't care, that's okay. You can just skip to the next video chapter in this video. But until then, enjoy this plot summary from me 2 years ago. It is absolutely a self-insert book where Debi has tried to write about herself and her own life and all these characters, and it's a thing. The Last Publishers are a Christian publishing company who start to make miracle jam, but they're also being targeted by Muslim terrorists. I'm not even joking. It is very clear that the main married couple in this book are supposed to be self-inserts of Michael and Debi themselves. This book is offensive. That is my main thought. It is full of offensive stereotypes about race and class and appearance and age and gender and religion. It's incredibly Islamophobic. And I say that as someone who is completely open to criticizing Islam, and I do in my videos. In this book, the main villains are Muslim, and their only crime is being Muslim. And they're just hated for that reason. And they're built up to be these like stereotype terrorists who just hate them Christian whores and all that rubbish stuff. And it's repulsive how it's written. The main heroes are trying to convert everyone to Christianity in this book. I'm not even joking, that is their purpose. They talk about it all the time. In chapter 1, we are introduced to Asher Joel, who I think is supposed to be our main hero. It opens up with Asher sitting in a cafe, and we're told that Yellowstone volcano in Yellowstone National Park is causing a bunch of earthquakes, and it's probably due to erupt any day now. This is the only mention of this in the first 100 pages, so it's kind of thrown in there to give some context, but then never mentioned again, so maybe it'll come back later, I don't know. Asher also contemplates the bombings mentioned in the local newspaper, because apparently people are getting used to them now, they're so common. But Asher's worried about what the locals call the Muslim invasion. It happened gradually. The influx of Arab-speaking Muslims into their small coastal area of Washington state. We find out that Asher has a very personal and not at all ridiculous reason to hate all Muslims in the world ever, and that's because Muslims killed his friend Dan. So Asher starts talking to this waitress in the little diner he's in about Dan. Debbie really writes dialect in this really over-the-top, possibly offensive way, I don't know. The first line for the waitress is, "Show her, honey, it's Guad Fuad." This waitress is all like, basically Dan was a hero. He'd pray out loud no matter how many Muslims were around. What a hero. And again, we have this weird double standard here. And then for some reason we get the waitress's backstory, even though she's never heard of again. And it's generic backstory. It's the same as every other woman in the book. Basically, she used to do drugs on the street before a good Christian man, Dan, saved her and showed her God. And this is the same story as most female characters have in the book. So we already kind of got a brief mention of it with Omar's wife, Old Mary, it's her backstory. One of the other characters that we'll meet later, it's her backstory. Like, half the women at least have this same backstory where they did drugs and then a good man showed them God. And then we're introduced to, and I quote, the Arab man who apparently used to stalk Dan, and the waitress thinks that he's the one who killed him, and now he's stalking Asher. We also learn in this chapter that Dan worked for this company called The Last Publishers, which is a fictional Christian publisher at the heart of this book. He issued, and I quote, a bold challenge to the local Muslim mosque. The old man had proven he cared deeply for the Muslim youth by cashing in all his stocks and using the money to finance the translation of the God's Story book into the Arab tongue. Then he had hired a webmaster to create a site with God's Story in all 5 dialects of Arabic. Old Dan then passed out thousands of business cards in the local school containing the web address where the Muslim youth could read the truth. And then we learn that Asher is going to be moving to Tennessee to take over Dan's job. And the waitress gets really creepy. Oh my god, this bit. And she's like, hey, The Last Publishers, I read their magazines. Sometimes they post pictures of this one particular girl who works for them. And she says, this is a direct quote from the book, we all figured you would court that gal in the magazine. Now she is cute. I've been praying for that Tennessee girl, Cheyenne. I think she's the one for you. Asher had noticed them too. Louise was right. She was a beauty. He had found her on www.threadtree.com and corresponded with her after he decided to move to Tennessee. As chapter 2 starts, we are introduced to Mary and Henry, an old married couple. Don't worry about them. You don't need to get attached to them at all because all they do is stalk a teenager for a while and then die. They're the first of many examples of good Christian people in this book who apparently have good intentions and want to help people and then never actually do anything. It's all a lot of praying and looking and watching, but no action. They drive out to a rough part of town and they watch a teenage prostitute from across the street. We can call her our little Mary. Henry's dear Mary began to pray as tears rolled down her lined face. Asher goes on a morning walk in Tennessee and he starts praying about Cheyenne in the forest, and it is seriously like r/men writing women Christian edition. Finally introduced to Cheyenne and her family, and we find out what the Last Publishers are actually doing. Hope, the mother, and the Debi Pearl character, has created this jam, which is a miracle cure for everything in the world ever, and they're trying to manufacture it and sell it. Cheyenne Freeman was full of delight as her truck approached the old bridge that led into the Freeman's property. Whew! I love my new truck. Everybody loves you, even Asher. He just has a problem with Pink. Pinky, yes! I'll call you Pinky. Wow, we are so cool. The hope of finding true love, the joy of being alive, and youthful hormones pulsed through her body. On impulse, she screamed with pleasure as she ran, announcing her arrival to her mother. No one acts like this, and if they do, they're insufferable and gross. And then we're told that Cheyenne's Indian heritage was easily seen in her features. And call me naive, I genuinely thought this meant she was an Indian woman until I read like a little bit further on, and I realized that every time Debbie says Indian, she actually means Native American, and that Debbie is throwing like every single stereotype she can into this book. Small children that had seen animated movies about Pocahontas sometimes mistook Cheyenne for a living, breathing version of the Indian maiden. Later in the book, she's described again. Asher was momentarily mesmerized by her appearance. Again, he took note of how strong her Indian ancestral roots were. The high cheekbones, the exotic nose, the smooth olive skin, and her long, lanky body folded into a relaxed squat, with her arms sticking straight out, elbows resting on her knees as she studied the jars, all spoke of her Indian heritage. I think the issue I have with it is, like, throughout the book, it just feels a lot like they're fetishizing her race. Cheyenne and Hope go on to joke about how it's so awful that she is 22 and still unmarried. So anyway, then it's explained that these two women are making berry mash, which is just like a fancy jam, and they're going to be mass producing it in China to sell to everyone as a miracle cure. Apparently it's so good that it cured her dad's blindness or something, and they plan to make millions off this miracle cure so they can print more Bibles in different languages to convert the world to Christianity. They're not selling the most potent version of this jam. They're selling a weaker one because it means that people will have to have a dose every day to keep them young and healthy. And I'm like, oh, how convenient. It just means people are going to have to buy more and they're going to make more money, aren't they? Hope says, there is a life force in the DNA that has not been identified. It is the combination of herbs and berries that gives us an edge. Somehow, I think by the will of God, we have happened upon a combination that closely approximates the properties of the tree of life. It's not only the combination, it's the process we employ that causes a chemical reaction producing an entirely new substance. And Cheyenne's dad saying, he will be able to prioritize outreach to Muslims. At the mention of Muslims, Cheyenne's knees felt weak. A cold shudder shook her insides. She looked down at her hands, trying to hide her dread. So then they revealed that as well as their main miracle jam that they're trying to mass produce and sell, they have this second jam, another one which is even more special, but they have less of it. And this thing is so cool and so great and so powerful that it can literally bring things back from the dead. Some stalker has been watching them from outside or something, and he has a listening device or whatever. Lustful, beady eyes drank in the young woman's form. Hidden on the slope behind the farmhouse, the rotund man snickered to himself as he adjusted his listening device. He exhaled his malicious intentions. Okay, Hopey Dopey, just say where you keep your stash of miracle cure so I can get what I need to be the man again. Yeah, and do your little girl. I might be gentle with her. Nah, on second thought, it ain't fun without the screams. We find out his name's Derek, and we're shown this photo of him, which is just weird. It's never outright said, but it's implied that he's impotent and that he's trying to get this miracle cure so he can not be impotent and rape the daughter. Meanwhile, Asher has been running around the forest with a gut feeling that something bad is going to happen. And while he's there, he just starts shouting about Cheyenne for no reason to God. So running around the woods by himself, he shouts, Lord, you know I would love to have that woman. God, just to hold her in my arms, talk to her, watch her expression change. Lord, that gal, it's getting harder and harder to resist her. He threw his head back and shouted into the morning stillness, love to have that woman. He spots Creepy Derek through his binoculars just as he does something horrible. He kills the family dog, and Asher's just watching from miles away through his binoculars, unable to do anything. So Asher runs onto a nearby road and jumps into a car with two boys that he knows from the ministry stuff. And they drive up to where the women and the dead dog and Stalkman are. And Asher has this gun for some reason. He starts waving it around before going over to pick up the body of the dead dog. Right, and here's where things get really confusing, right? Because they talk about Derek and they identify this creepy man as being Derek, but at this point I think he's already run off or something, so they can't catch him or do anything, and I don't know. This is clearly a 50 or 60-year-old man, right? But when Asher and the boys start talking about him, they make it sound like he's in his teens or his 20s or something, and I don't understand why you include pictures like this if they don't match up with what's in the text. His dad's the sheriff, his granddaddy's the judge, so Derek gets away with everything no matter who he hurts. He never has to answer to anybody. Bunch of white supremacists, the lot of them controlling this county. Weird. And then, just to top it all off, they claim that Derek is a paid assassin for the KKK. Because of course he is. Asher tells Hope that he saw Derek kill her dog, and in the most bizarre reaction ever. As she listened, Hope's countenance clouded into anger, then changed to confusion, finally moving on to relief. Hope slapped her hands together almost in glee. So someone is spying. I figured as much. So then she's like, well, Wiggles, you're the guinea pig again. Only this time, there's nothing left to lose. You sure look like a goner. So it seems to me they've been experimenting on the dog for a while. So Asher asks them if they've conducted like proper scientific tests for any of their jams. And Cheyenne replies, only a little, with the few people who know what we're doing. Those that have invested in the company. 2 of them have reversed heart disease, and 1 saw his wife's cancer remitted. Cheyenne says, Rob advised us to opt out of clinical trials. It would be impossible to keep everything under wraps if hundreds of people became involved and started reporting similar results as Dad and Rob. So they don't want to do clinical trials because that will alert everyone to know they have an actual miracle cure, and then too many people would know about it, and then they might not be able to make as much money. And then they head back upstairs and, oh look, miracle, the dog is alive. So, good. God wakes Hope up in the middle of the night and tells her, take 2 clean 6-gallon buckets and 1 length of 36-inch tubing. You'll find it on the pantry shelf, God tells her. So we now know that God is actually like Santa. He knows when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake, he knows if you've been bad or good, and he knows what you keep on your pantry shelves. Take it downstairs, siphon the juice off the top of all 22 gallons of brew and fill the buckets. Take the 2 big buckets to your lab. You must add 2 drops of the contents of the small dropper bottle, and okay, it's boring, it goes on. Basically, he just gives her these really long, detailed instructions to move the jam around, add the special miracle jam to the regular jam, and then ship it all off like this other place around the world to this other person who apparently needs it, but also it's kind of hiding it from the bad guys who want to steal it from here. And so, yeah, Hope just gets up in the middle of the night and works and works and works and works and works all by herself and has no sleep. And meanwhile, her husband's upstairs, fast asleep. And the next morning, he has the cheek to get up and say to his exhausted, sleep-deprived wife, man, did I sleep well. I can't remember a night I slept so heavy. So Asher arrives to cart off the jam to the airport, and on the way back, he's followed by the Muslim terrorists in the car. He gets out his gun, waves it around a bit, they vanish. Meanwhile, Derek comes back to try and break into the lab again, only to find all the jam is gone. Oh no, looks like God saved the day. And we're back to Henry and Mary, remember the old people who were stalking the troubled teenage prostitute? And they're watching her again and doing nothing. Again. And then Henry dies, peacefully, in his sleep. Mary is put in a care home, and while she's in the care home, she's visited by an angel. And not that it matters, but spoiler alert, in the next chapter, Mary dies peacefully in her old age, having done absolutely nothing to further on this plot, or do anything, or interact with any of the characters. There's just no reason for her and Henry to be in this at all, other than they stalk a teenager, they pray, they die. Omar, this completely new character, who is driving down a busy road filled with traffic on his way to teach a Bible class at the publishing place. And on his way, he spots a hitchhiker, and it's pretty clear that this is the same girl who was working as a prostitute who the old couple were stalking. The names that she's called in this book and the way she's described, it's incredibly rude and disrespectful and dehumanizing. His eyes were drawn back to the pathetic girl. She couldn't be more than 16, yet her stance and expression showed a tiredness beyond her years. Bone dog tired. Turning his face, he began to review the text for tonight's meeting. And then he starts talking to himself and praying to God, because that's what all the characters do in this book, and it's the only way we ever know what they're thinking or feeling or who they are. I'll bet some skeptics are ready with their questions tonight. Yes, sirree, I sure like to be prepared when I meet folks who don't believe the book, all capital letters. They worship the edumacation. Lord, that white girl is pale. I do believe that is the whitest white I ever did see. Sick, Lord, she looks sick. Help her, Lord. And it goes on for over 2, nearly 3 pages of him literally just saying, someone help that poor girl. Lord, send someone to help her. I'm asking in Jesus' name, and so on. And apparently he doesn't want to do it himself because he says, Lord, you know how much is at stake. The last publisher is at a critical time in publishing. If I pick up a white girl, it could jeopardize the whole project. 1 million Muslim souls are at stake, and all it would take is one lily-white teenage girl crying foul. The whole thing would be derailed while everyone at the last publishers tried to defend me. God, you know she's going to cry foul. Basically, he won't help someone clearly in need in case they make a false rape accusation about him. It's almost like rape and sexual assault allegations are so common amongst these communities, and that Debi writing this has heard so many accusations, but would rather believe that the women making these claims are making it up because they're rebellious and whatever. She would rather believe that than believe that any of the men she knows are capable of raping or assaulting women. Omar tells God about his time in prison and that he has a wife and 4 kids, and when no one else will help this girl, sitting slumped and defeated, Omar whispered, "Okay, God, I'll offer her a ride." So it turns out this teenager's holding a baby, so she needed even more help. And the whole car ride is just bizarre. So, apparently she, asks him for food, and he just responds by letting out this weird, loud laugh noise out of nowhere. He shook his head at the incongruity of the situation. Who's more afraid, me or her? Probably me. She looks mean. Debi tries to make us feel sorry for him as well, right? Omar could feel the sweat gather on his forehead. The hair on the back of his neck prickled with potential danger, while his mind engaged in private conversation. "Oh no, you don't. God made me pick you up and you'd better behave yourself. I mean it. Don't you even think of crying foul. Don't you dare try and take advantage of this circumstance. I've seen that look before." This kid is obviously scared and defensive, and he's just plain rude to her, and he orders her stuff like, "You wipe that sassy face off, girl, and get out of the car this minute. You owe a little thankfulness right now, and best you remember it." Asher watched dumbfounded as he watched an edgy Omar enter the herb den, escorting a small, pale teenage girl carrying a tightly wrapped baby. Prayer automatically came to his heart. "Lord, he must be scared. Give us wisdom. Help us, Lord." Chapter 9, Cheyenne tries to look after our runaway teenager, and by look after, I mean she's judgy and bitchy and rude to her. The girl tries to lie about her name, and Cheyenne is disgusted, which is an absolute overreaction. "I mean, you don't look like an Anne." "No, you're a Mary Magdalene." It turns out the girl is called Magdalene, which is an odd name, but whatever. And she's shocked that Cheyenne guessed it, and in a panic she throws her baby on the floor. And apparently no one's really fazed by this, and it takes a whole paragraph before we learn that the baby that got thrown on the floor isn't actually a baby, it's a doll. Cheyenne just mocks her for having a doll at her age. Rude. And she mocks her for the doll being so old and dirty, which is rude and unnecessary. And we get a description of Magdalene. Her skin and her clothes have burns on them. Her hair's been cut. It was dyed months ago, but it started growing out again. She's very thin. She's dirty. I mean, she's clearly been through a lot. And instead of having any sympathy or heart, Debi describes her as the picture of street trash. But just as I was beginning to kind of feel sorry for this Magdalene character, Debi ruins this as well, because turns out she's homophobic. A dirty, suspicious face looked up at Cheyenne, trying to figure out the motive behind the kindness. Disgusted by her conclusions, Magdalene asked, "You queer?" Cheyenne has cut Magdalene's hair, does a lot of calling her ugly. "Spare me your stupid conversations about your freak friends." Magdalene's nasty response surprised Cheyenne. Cheyenne's answer seemed to have no rancor, but she felt like spitting in the girl's face. Cheyenne silently prayed for wisdom. Please cut away the ugliness from her soul, just like I cut away the ugly dyed hair, so she can see your love. They're both horrible. So at this point, it's revealed that Ash has left to go to Thailand on this work thing, and Cheyenne says he's over there trying to reach the Hmong people by giving them the God storybook in their own language. It's a whole thing, apparently. And then Magdalene, or girl, as she's now settled for being called, responds with the most disgusting answer ever. Yeah, what gets me is why they would even bother trying to reach a subrace. They sure as %% are not gonna be in heaven. After all, they're only half human. Like that black preacher of yours that picked me up doing his Christian duty for the day. Man, it's simple information I learnt in Sabbath school when I was 10 years old. People of colour, Africans, Asians, Arabs, they're not Aryan, and therefore a subrace. You know much about the Garden of Eden? When Eve fell, then she got it on with Satan, a beast, and bred the subrace. It's one of the most disgusting things I've ever read. And then finally the girls, they get in a car and they start driving to work, and they realise that they're being followed by the same Muslim guy who was following Asher before. And then they go to work, and the Muslim guy drives off and pulls up behind a tobacco store, which apparently is some secret Muslim terrorist den. He says, "It won't be long now. These Christian whores will be sorry they defamed Allah." And then Debi ends the chapter with some of the most offensive footnotes so far. Muslims use several ways to proselytize their religion: immigration, colonization, and outbreeding. After large enough communities are established, violent threats and militant police demands become effective. When Muslims move to new countries, they tend to become more militant, more conservative, and more dedicated to changing their new home to become an Islamic nation. Islam is a violent religion. Heaven is granted to the militantly faithful. At the Muslims' current explosive birth rate, it will become a reality within 10 years. Through immigration and outbreeding, the Arabic Muslims have successfully colonized Europe. In one Arabic-speaking Muslim community in Bangkok, Thailand, there are over 20,000 strong. You can smell the difference as you drive by, as their cleanliness is not that of the Thai people. Locals fear the strange militant people. It's so disgusting. It's horrible. It's dehumanizing. It's nasty. It's full of stereotypes. It's false. It's just... getting very angry, sorry. Okay, and with that, I think we're mostly caught up. One of the things in the first 100 pages that I didn't actually touch on was Debi and Cheyenne having this whole conversation about what happens when it's like the end of the world and Judgment Day and God's deciding who to take to heaven to live forever and who to burn in hell on earth. And there's a really, really weird bit about how he's gonna take mostly women and not many men for whatever reason, and then Debi's like, yeah, there'll be like 7 women for every man, so every man has to have 7 wives. Isn't that wonderful? Ha ha ha, your dad's gonna love that. It's very... I'm saying Debi, no, the character's Hope, sorry. Hope and Cheyenne, the character is such a Debi Pearl self-insert that I just keep calling Hope Debi. Sorry, Hope and Cheyenne. Anyway, the whole point still stands. It's very weird. I don't know why I didn't cover that bit in the first video. Maybe it was too weird for me, but here we are. I thought it was worth mention. And with that in mind, let's move on to the next part of this book. So there's still about 220 pages to cover, so I've decided to split this up into 2 videos because it's a lot, and my notes on this are ridiculous. So I think we're going to cover the next 80 or so pages in this video and then the rest in one last video. So let's do that now. So where we're starting this on chapter 11, right? Time has skipped forward like maybe a week or so from where we left off, and Cheyenne and Magdalene are now working in Cheyenne's herb shop, the Herb Den, with 2 of Cheyenne's friends, Bobby Joe and Julie. These 2 characters immediately confused me because I was like, I know what I think of them, but I don't get what Debi's trying to make me think of them. There's a lot going on with these 2, and it's a bit of a mess. If you saw the last video, you'll know that Debi likes to include these absolutely like awful pictures in this book, and basically they're not illustrations even though they're portrayed that way, but they're photographs of Debi's friends and family that have then been turned black and white with this crappy filter over them, and they're meant to like represent the characters, and she labels them as such. She's like, this is Baby Joe, this is Julie, this is Derek the creepy stalker. But the problem is they look nothing like the character descriptions, like not even a little bit. So here's the photo she included of creepy Derek in part 1, and this is supposed to be a fat man in his late 20s, early 30s with a balding head. The description and the photo are not the same person. This is clearly a skinny man in his 50s or 60s with a full head of hair, just pulling a creepy face while stood in some bushes. This part of the book, the illustrations are no different. Julie is meant to be a 25-year-old woman who is blonde and skinny, I'll give her that, but she looks like a 14-year-old girl who is blonde and skinny, whereas Bobby Joe is meant to be a quite overweight woman who is always eating despite being on a diet. That's the joke around her, apparently. And she's constantly made fun of for her weight. Apparently, at different times in the plot, she needs to lose 5 pounds, lose 10 pounds, lose however many pounds. And also, from what I can gather, she's like maybe in her 30s? I can't quite tell. It's hard to say. We'll discuss the age thing a little bit more later. She's meant to be about 30, and again, look at the photo, and she looks like a very slim, maybe 16-year-old. This is nothing like the description we've been getting of her. And the other thing is, she's meant to be like all full of curves and super sexy and all this sort of thing, and I'm like, That's a 16-year-old child in a hoodie. Please stop calling her sexy. It makes me very uncomfortable. I mean, just the idea of showing this picture and saying that this is meant to be a character who is overweight and needs to diet and lose weight is incredibly dangerous and offensive. This is a very slim woman, clearly. Anyway, rant aside, let's look at the plot. In the herb shop, or the herb den, immediately this chapter opens with more creepy, fetishizing descriptions of Cheyenne. You'll remember if you saw the first part, this is a thing that happens a lot. Cheyenne is meant to be a Native American woman who Debi keeps calling Indian and exotic and everything else, and there's this weird like fetishization of her whole appearance and demeanour and race, and it's really gross. Here's another example. Long silky brown hair fell, touching the floor as the girl arched her back into a U. Bobby Joe glanced up at Cheyenne. She grunted with disdain. "You skinny girls make me sick. Having to work with you three skinny ninnies is a drag." So don't worry guys, not only do we have the creepy fetishization of Cheyenne as a character, and I mean this one wasn't quite specific to her race, but just in the theme of what we saw in the first part, you get it. So we have that problem with Cheyenne, and also we have the body shaming again. But don't worry guys, body shaming goes always in this book. Basically, unless you look exactly like Debi, you're getting shamed. Overweight, getting shamed. Too skinny, getting shamed. I also have to giggle at Debi literally writing disdain instead of disdain, like with a T, as though she has a stain on her, not has a feeling of disdain. It's quite funny. Debi does this throughout the book. You'll see more examples of this, of her just getting words mixed up. There's one where she completely misnames a gun later. There's one where, and it's the funniest one, there's one where she gets chloroform and chlorophyll mixed up. Can you believe this is a woman who has written like 20 books and homeschools her kids? And, oh god, did she have an editor on this? And if so, why are they as dumb as she is? Interesting, no editor is credited. Now, this scene is actually the perfect introduction to the friendship that these women have, because this is all it ever is throughout the book, and it stays this way. There's no development or anything like this. They're rude to each other, they're mean to each other, they call each other's names, they argue, they act like they're all better than each other and look down on each other. And Debi then goes on to tell us what an iconic and renowned friendship this is, and how everyone's like, "Oh, you girls, you're like family, you're infamous, you all get along so well." And she like presents this as like, this is the pinnacle of friendship, this is what you should all be aiming for with your friends. But they're all just absolutely horrible to each other. They're nasty constantly. Now, call me crazy, I don't have that many friends myself, but the friends I do have, we're not mean to each other. We're actually nice and support each other and encourage each other. And apparently that's not how friendships work according to this book, you know? It's weird. So Bobby Joe starts out body shaming Cheyenne, and Cheyenne literally snaps back immediately, telling Bobby Joe, whose initials kept making me laugh throughout writing this entire script. I'm such a child. She shames her, and I quote, for stuffing her face. Julie then chastises Cheyenne for being mean, Magdalene laughs and encourages it all, and Cheyenne, knowing she's probably hurting her friend's feelings, Cheyenne took on her favourite tease, becoming a drama queen. She dragged the back of her hand across her forehead as if on stage. "Forgive me, please, Bobby Joe. I'm truly sorry I brought to your attention that you are indeed gorging on a cookie while you're supposed to lose 5 pounds." Debi wants these to be our protagonists. She wants us to like them, to admire them, to root for them, and yet she cannot make them likeable at all. They're all just mean to each other. All they ever do is sit around and either talk about the Bible or bitch at each other. It's horrible. Of course, not all characters in fiction have to be likeable. Some of the most interesting characters in fiction aren't. But to be a good character, whether we like them or not, should be intentional on the author's behalf, you know? The author must at least be aware that their character is unlikable. The flaws must be intentional. That's not what's happening here. Debi continually tells us how great and wonderful and kind and, you know, good Christians these women are. They're such good, kind people. And yet we never actually see any good or kind behaviour. It's all just mean, constantly. I do wonder if Debbie doesn't know how to write a nice character because she's not a nice person herself. Normally I leave personal, I guess like attacks and opinions about a person out of book reviews like this, but with Debi Pearl I make an exception because she's been linked to the deaths of 7 children and she's encouraged literally hundreds of wives to stay in abusive relationships, so I don't give a damn about her, to be fair. Anyway, I've said a lot about these women who Debbie keeps calling girls, but the protagonist of the book is actually meant to be this guy, Asher. You remember he was in part 1. Thing is, despite taking up, 80% of the book cover, he's not actually in these next 80 pages at all, pretty much. He makes one appearance once. He's disappeared off to Thailand for, I quote, 2 long boring weeks helping Timothy Vick pass out Hmong translations of God's storybooks. So let's just forget about him for the next 60 pages or so, yeah? Debbie does. And this work they're doing in Thailand, don't worry, we're going to talk more about that later as well. Anyway, as the girls are busy packing up herbs and orders and stuff like that and sorting through produce and doing what they do, we are introduced to Yancey. This whole section is just awkward as hell. Basically, to summarise, a man enters the herb shop and then the women get mad that he's there and they act incredibly rude towards him and just start throwing insults on him because he dared to come into their shop. I've worked in customer service a lot. That's not generally how you treat customers. No. The women get into an argument with him over religion and stuff like that. He's a bit shifty, the girls get really, really rude to him. There's a whole bunch of racist and anti-Semitic stuff said, and I still don't really understand the point of him in this entire book. I think she's maybe setting him up to be some sort of villain or mole, or maybe it's meant to be a double bluff or something like that. I don't know. Point is, she never wrote a sequel, so we've no idea. But anyway, we'll read some bits from this section and, God, get ready for more of Debbie's awful and possibly offensive attempts at writing accents. So Yancey enters the shop and says, "Yo, what's this place? You guys sell anything? Or you just here to smell up da town?" This isn't the worst case of accent writing in the book, not at all. We'll see plenty more yet. We've seen plenty more in the first part, don't worry. And don't get me wrong, I don't have a problem with people phonetically writing out dialect in books or poetry in general. Not everything has to be in standard English all the time. I actually really love when poets show dialects and accents in their work, especially when it's their own, and especially when it has purpose. If you saw my video on Christmas poetry, which a lot of you probably didn't, it wasn't very clickbaity, so not many people watched it, but I actually really enjoyed it. It was a fun video to make. But in that, I spoke about Benjamin Zephaniah's poetry and how a lot of his work, he actually writes out Jamaican dialect in his work, and I absolutely adore it. It's amazing. You can hear his voice when you're reading his work. He's putting his roots and his heart and his soul into his writing, and you feel it's so uniquely him. He uses his dialect for a reason, and it works so, so well. I love it. It's so authentically beautiful. I love it. For other examples, look at poems like 6 O'Clock News by Tom Leonard, which tries to get us to think more critically about accents and the prejudices and biases we often have when we hear certain accents and how we think we need to hear certain accents in some settings but not others and so on. Great poem. Again, using dialect in writing for a purpose to convey a meaning beyond the mere denotations of the words themselves, Really, really good purpose. Dialect in writing, so important, so powerful, wonderful when done well. However, that's not what Debbie does. When you get a person trying to replicate a number of accents like Debbie is, in a way that feels almost cartoonish, it just comes across as a bit offensive. None of these accents she's mimicking in her writing are her accent. None of them are really in there for a purpose other than to say, ha ha ha, listen to how weird their accent is, She doesn't understand enough about the accents to write them out well. There's no consistency, between the speech, a person's accent completely alternates from one paragraph to another. Sometimes they'll be being like, "Oh, what this then?" And then another they'll be like, "So what is this then?" There's no consistency. It's like Debbie just puts it in when and where she wants for a cheap laugh, and it feels offensive. Cheyenne's eyes narrowed as they shifted to the newcomer's top of the line digital camera, with a leg-sized telephoto lens hanging from a strap around his neck. And now this is where I realised Debbie knows nothing about photography. A telephoto lens like this is going to be big, it's going to be heavy. I know exactly the kind she means, probably something like this. Most quality telephoto lenses like this, they are chunky, they're heavy. Often, if you're using it with a tripod, you have to attach the lens to the tripod rather than the camera body, otherwise the whole thing's going to topple over. A lens that heavy is likely not going to be slung around his neck. Something like that, you're either going to want a crossbody strap with like a release thing that you can like use like that. You're going to want to sling it over your shoulder maybe, but round your neck, that is just gonna hurt. Like, it really is. So Debbie clearly has never used one of these herself. The other thing is, later in this chapter, Yancey starts to take photos inside the shop with this probably 300mm or more lens. Those photos are not going to show much of anything. It's like, you're going to get maybe like a close-up of an eye, an eyebrow, something like this. It's not going to capture anything important. It's probably not going to focus properly inside a shop. It just makes no sense. Either Debbie wrote that scene forgetting what lens he had with him, or she knows nothing about cameras and photography. It could be either, to be fair. You'll also notice at this point that Debbie's descriptions of men are far different to the way she describes women. There's no, with the men, no back arching, flushed skin, hair swishing, radiating beauty, the grace, the elegance, there's none of that with the men, not at all. While with Cheyenne, we got her back arched in a U as her hair touched the floor, and none of that. With Yancey, we get pulling his sticky shirt away from his chest. He ran his hand over his face like a windshield wiper, dripping sweat on the floor. Swish! I had no idea it could get this hot in May. A new beautiful Goyles must be the famous trio. Except there seem to be 4 of you. Right? This is followed up with, Bobby Joe had already decided that this visitor wasn't likely to be worth the time he would take away from their heavy workload. She quietly whispered to Julie, Great, super city geek alert. Did you get a load of his orange hat? He must share Cheyenne's sense of fashion. Also, that last line, too many S's. That took me a lot of tries to say. But seriously, this is rude, this is mean to both the customer in your shop and your supposed best friend. Horrible. No. If I'd spoken about customers like this back when I worked in a pharmacy and photo lab, or when I worked in a bar, I wouldn't have had my job very long. As character intros go, I really do not like Bobby Joe because of her behaviour in scenes like this. It's horrible. And she never gets better, she never changes, she just keeps doing it. But Julie, being Julie, invites him to come and sit with them, and he says, Gee, thanks. My name is Ruben Yancey, and I am a professional freelance photographer. I'm on assignment for American Journey magazine from New York City. I don't know what American Journey magazine's meant to be. I don't know what real word joiny is supposed to be. I can't figure it out, but maybe that's because I just don't know American magazines. Bobby Joe then mocks his accent directly to his face, while Magdalene continued to stare at him like he was a poisonous spider, making him feel unwelcome. Bobby Joe then thinks, Poor guy, even a jerk deserves to be treated better than that. Bobby Joe knew her biting sarcasm would be refreshing compared to Magdalene's hexing look. Is she serious? Mocking someone and being rude to them is refreshing as opposed to a victim of child abuse silently looking at someone they're scared of. Because let's remember, Magdalene is a child, probably like 15 max we've established, who was addicted to drugs, forced into prostitution, raped a number of times, and as we later learn, the victim of a really awful assault. It's normal for her to be a bit scared. It's normal for her to be cold towards men. A stranger coming into the shop, I think it's okay for her to stand there silently and look at him a bit worried, you know? Yancey then starts checking out the girls and gets a bit creepy. These descriptions again. Compare these to how Debbie described Yancey earlier with his windshield wiper of sweat and you'll see the difference. Of Magdalene, he says, the extreme pale eyes and white hair were unusual. Almost like an albino. Albino? Albino? How do you pronounce that? Either way. Young. Early teen. Small. Likes to stay focused on what she's doing. Good. I hope she never looks up again. Rude. Of Bobby Joe, he describes her as a bigger, bolder, sexy-looking young woman. And a little later, she was definitely a traffic stopper. Big, generously endowed, well proportioned, and with all that long curly brown hair. She was loaded. So gross. But again, let me just pull you back to this image of her, in which she is a tiny, skinny, maybe 16-year-old looking girl with long straight hair. What are these descriptions, Debbie? If you're going to include photos of actual people as your characters, at least make the descriptions line up, you know? Then Yancey gets all creepy about Cheyenne, or maybe I should say Debbie gets all creepy about Cheyenne through Yancey's words. Yancey could see the compassion in her soft brown eyes. She's cute, not pretty, not beautiful, not even sexy, just cute, in a sweet, innocent kind of way. A bashful chick, obviously not used to confident men. And then he goes on to describe her as a tall, exotic beauty. I'm sorry, but you can't call a Native American woman exotic when your book is set in America. Bothers me. But compare all these descriptions to how Yancey describes Julie, who is the woman he ends up marrying in this book. So this is how he talks about his future wife in comparison. I think it's very bizarre. He says she's a smaller woman with long, dusty blonde hair and quiet. He then says everything about her seemed straight, except for the soft curls that played along her brow. Her straight, narrow skirt accentuated her small figure and perfect posture. She looked clean and well-ordered. He decided he liked her. Let the other guys fight over the exotic beauties or man-eating sharks. I like my girls to be mine and mine alone. No ogling from other men, no competition, no reason to feel jealous. If this guy isn't out here just waving all the red flags, then I don't know who is, you know? Oh, it's bad, it's bad. Yancey then starts having a little nose around the herb den, and he starts looking through, like, its accounting ledgers and stuff, and I'm like, why are these even out? This is incredibly unprofessional. But he starts looking through them anyway, and we find out that these guys are making a lot of money. Like, a lot. Like, more money than I've ever considered being able to make in my lifetime, you know? One product alone, they made $289,000 on. One product. It's ridiculous. And I spoke about this I think I spoke about this a little bit in my first video, but I do have a problem with these characters because they're supposed to be these good Christian people who just care about people and they care about the world. They want to fix everything, they want to save everyone, but they're so damn money hungry. It's kind of disgusting. These guys make so much money, and everything they do is about making money and how they can make more money and how they can profit more. And then they want to use the profits to print more of these books so they can convert people to the religion. But surely they could do more good in the world if they weren't doing that, and also weren't so focused on just profit, you know? As we saw in the first part of this video, they've come up with basically a miracle jam that can bring people back from the dead, right? It can bring a dog back from the dead. It can cure cancer. It can cure blindness. It can cure all these illnesses and stuff like that. And all they're concerned with is, how do we make the most profit from this? Not how do we get it out to as many people as possible as quickly as possible, you know? They literally have that conversation in the first part about, we need to dilute this down so people need to take more than one dose so we can make more money from it, so we can print more of our book and give them out to people. I just find it really gross. If you wanna help people in the world, give them medicine for free. Don't be diluting it down so you can charge them more. The way to help people is by helping those who are actually suffering, not just trying to convert them to your religion and making them pay to be able to live their lives, you know? It's really, really horrible. In this book, and in her other works in general, Debbie is very, very critical of Big Pharma and all that crap. But Debbie's characters here are doing exactly what she accuses pharmaceutical companies of doing, but worse. Way, way worse. Bobby Joe then decides to distract Yancey from looking through the accounting books by flexing her body at him, flaunting her body, trying to seduce him with her body. It's really weird. She stood, arching her back and stretching her arms overhead. Her ploy works better than she could have imagined. Yancey's quick mind forgot everything as he stared flabbergasted at her full-figured body bent backwards. Once again, Debbie is being really creepy about these young women. But also, she's pushing this narrative that men are just these uncontrollable, untamable beasts who just can't help themselves around women. And so it's up to women to either cover themselves up so men don't get tempted, or use their body to manipulate men into getting what they want. It's gross, it's sexist, it plays into harmful stereotypes about both genders, and I have a real problem with it. Yancey then just full on starts mansplaining their own business to these women. Bothers me. He's like, he looks at their accounts, he's like, oh damn, you women are profitable. You know what you need to do to be better? He says, the herb den, that's cute. What you guys need is a coffee shop. Days all over in New York, and this little town could use some class. Once again, note the lack of consistency with the accent. It's not New York anymore. Now he's back to saying New York. But all of this, no, please stop. No. Then there's a bit more rehashing of the plot and, you know, fear-mongering and all that sort of stuff. I swear half of this book is just people, actually no, more than half of the book. 75% of this book is people just describing things that happened off-page over and over and over again with no actual action. The only action scenes we get, there are 2 of them in the book. One of them we're going to cover in this video, one of them in the next. Other than that, I mean, I guess maybe the dog one was an action. 3 action scenes in the book. Everything else is just people sitting around and talking about things that happened elsewhere at another time. It's very annoying. Like, even just look at the opening scene of the book. The opening scene in this is Asher sat in a cafe talking about how his friend Daniel died a while back and now he's moving. And that's it. If this was me, I'd have opened the book with the scene of Asher's friend Daniel being hunted down and killed, and why and how that happened, and show some action, show some excitement, get the reader pumped up and excited, be like, oh my god, this is happening straight away. And then Asher can move to wherever and tell us about the aftermath, and oh yeah, it made me sad and that's why I'm moving here. Bring that in later, start with some action, you know? Another example, instead of just having Hope and Cheyenne sat around talking about, oh, isn't this jam great? Oh, we're gonna produce it in China. Oh, we're gonna make so much money off this. No, instead of just like having them talk about everything that's happened, maybe show me a scene of, I keep wanting to say Debbie instead of Hope. Show me a scene of Hope actually figuring out the formula for the miracle jam. Show me her toiling away in her workshop. Show me her excitement when she finally figures it out. Show me her first test on a patient and her being unsure if it's gonna work or not, but then everyone being so happy when it does and blah, blah. Show me the action, please. This scene here is another example of it. Debbie is trying to tell us that the world is ending. It's nearly Judgment Day or whatever she wants to call it. But all this bad stuff happening, instead of showing us it happening, she just has characters standing around time and time and time and time again, talking about things happening everywhere else in the world, but where we're watching on the page, you know? In this section, Julie says, since last year you can't go anywhere, not even the mall without thinking you might get blown up. So it's on everyone's mind. If that were not enough, the news is full of a dozen different volcanoes that are threatening to blow, including Yellowstone. And then a little later they talk about how rats are spreading a plague around that's making everyone ill too, although we never see anyone actually suffering from that mysterious illness. We never see a volcano actually erupt. We never see a volcano actually erupt and hurt anyone. There's just no actual action on the page. We're told all these things are happening, Debbie's trying to build up this world, but we never actually see any of it. It's very hard to believe in a world like this and be worried about it and be worried about any of these characters and these things happening to them when we've never actually seen these issues for ourselves on the page. And it's unnecessary to keep repeating these problems over and over and over without adding anything new. The problems they discuss in this section here, like 110, 120 pages into the book, are exactly what they were discussing in the first 20 pages, in the first 60 pages. Nothing new has happened since. It's the same conversations just happening between often the same characters. It's boring, it's repetitive. Debbie really just is a bad writer. Anyway, in response to hearing about these bombings, the plague, and the volcanoes, Yancey gets incredibly anti-Semitic. Yancey looked interested, yet took on a cynical tone. Yeah, good old Father Abraham sure produced the scourge of the earth. D-A asterisk hash Jews. He means damn Jews, but Debbie won't swear. Excuse my French, ladies. For a second, he sounded very anti-Semitic. It was a touchy subject due to the white supremacists in the area making such a big issue of their hatred for Israel. Awkward silence filled the room. Yeah, maybe he sounded anti-Semitic because he was anti-Semitic. You can't be like, oh, damn Jews, it's all their fault, and then be like, was that anti-Semitic? I don't know, it's so hard to tell. He was subtle. Yancey then finds the God storybook that this whole book is centered around. And once again, it's clear that Debbie knows nothing about anything she's talking about. Yancey says, hey, this is some quality artwork. The drawing looks like that same artist that did Incredible Hulk comics. Ah yes, that one single artist that did them comics. And then we see a picture later in the book of basically the artwork from this supposed book, and we're shown what it looks like. And it's bad. It's really, really bad. The artwork is of poor quality. The layouts are horrific. There's no good flow to the page. There's far too much empty space in places. Even jokingly comparing this to, say, like, a Marvel artist is offensive. This is nowhere near close to the kind of standard you would get in a comic book from Marvel or DC or any of the big ones, you know? You show this to them and you would be laughed out of the room. Anyway, then Yancey suddenly looked up with narrow eyes and his voice held a question. Malachi Freeman sounds Jewish? More anti-Semiticism, which once again is never challenged by the women in the room. All we get is, was that anti-Semitic? Better move on. That's all we get. It's never addressed or brought up again for the next 100 pages in the book. Later we get some questioning of who Yancey is, but for very, very, very different reasons, not for his outwardly anti-Semitic behavioural statements. It's bad. Now, I'm not saying every character in a book has to be nice and good and whatever. You can have villains in a book and you can have them say offensive things, but I think the author has to make it very clear that they disagree with these statements and that this isn't their view. And, you know, have it challenged by other characters, have it called out, that sort of thing. Debbie doesn't do this, and it's just very uncomfortable to read. And I think she often takes it too far with the things they say. There's some passages later on in the book where certain characters say certain things, and there's a lot of racial slurs in there. And I'm not sure exactly how to address it on video because it's disturbing and horrible to read. I've always kind of had the stance of like, oh, you know, when you're quoting from something, quote it exactly. You know, like, it's not you saying it, so it's not a problem. But some of her passages are they're filled with so many slurs and so much disgusting stuff that I don't think I can comfortably repeat it. It just feels wrong. It feels unnecessary. It feels like she's enjoying throwing around these slurs and being like, well, I'm not the one saying it, it's this character. And that makes me uncomfortable, and I don't think I want to repeat them when we get to them. But yeah, we'll cover them when we get to them. Jumping ahead too much. Anyway, without addressing... Well, actually, no, Cheyenne's like, oh yeah, that's my dad, don't worry, he's not actually Jewish. Yeah, she then describes to Yancey the whole plan to translate the books into every known language and send them out to everyone in the world to convert them to Christianity. And Yancey asks, why is he giving out books to the Muslims? They're very religious, so he's wasting his money trying to convert them. The obvious irritation in Cheyenne's voice as she challenged the newcomer confirmed the girl's suspicions. Have you got a better idea how to solve the problem of Muslim terrorists? It's not going to go away. There's no place to run, no country to flee to that isn't home to Muslims. There's no other Muslim solution unless God does something. We're hoping to be a part of that solution. Besides, Muslim people as a whole have never been allowed to hear the truth. In some countries, many can't even read. Now, we covered a lot in the first part about Debbie's blatant Islamophobia. Making all Muslim people the bad guy and the villains of this book is just so messed up. As I've said many times, I'm as critical of a lot of the fundamental and harmful beliefs in Islam as I am of any religion. I'll happily call out the harmful bits when I see it. But just like with Christianity, just like with any other religion in the world, you can't villainize everyone who believes in that religion because there's so much diversity of beliefs and actions and thoughts and different people within those religions. Believing a religion doesn't make you a good or bad person. You know, it bothers me. I also hate this idea that the only reason they're Muslim is just because they haven't heard Christianity yet. Once people hear it, then they'll convert. If you're not a Christian, it's because you haven't really heard about it. Once you hear about it, you'll understand. You'll become Christian. Like, it bothers me so much. It implies that everyone who has their own beliefs or different beliefs than you are just ignorant or naive or stupid, and I find that really, really offensive. And it's kind of funny because, like, Debi knows the power of childhood indoctrination, you know? She wrote a whole book herself on how to indoctrinate your kids. It's called Jumping Ship, and it's about how to indoctrinate your kids enough that once they're old enough to think for themselves and leave the home, they won't leave the religion because you've got it so far in their head already. You've brainwashed them so much already that they're not going to question things for themselves. She wrote a whole book about that. She knows the power of this. It just... Anyway, other thing is, does anyone else get really icky Nazi vibes from the phrase, the Muslim solution? It bothers me. I do not like it. No. And the final thing is this whole idea of many Muslims can't even read is just disgusting and harmful and an outdated and untrue stereotype. It's horrific. Debi seems to think that anyone who lives outside of America or has a different belief to her is somehow stupid and illiterate and backwards and living in caves. It's really, really bad and really harmful. And these stereotypical views, she just keeps bringing up throughout these videos, and it's... throughout these books. Throughout the pages, throughout the chapters. Words are hard. She keeps bringing them up throughout the chapters, and it's really, really horrible. Just really horrible and offensive. Anyway, even though they think that Yancey could potentially be anti-Semitic, but they're not sure, it was so subtle, they decide to invite him to their Bible study group, and I assume he goes along at some point, but I don't know. It happens off-page. We're never even told it actually happens. It's just suddenly Yancey's in like every other scene, and he's just part of the group now. He's just been accepted, and you're like, oh, okay. When did that happen? Last thing I knew they hated him, and now he's here. Okay. It's weird. But then before this scene ends, before this chapter ends, a pregnant woman comes into the shop to buy herbs, and they're way more welcoming towards her than they ever were towards Yancey. I don't know what the prejudice is, but okay. The thing is, they're really, really nice to this woman's face, but just incredibly rude about her behind her back. Debi literally titles this section, Hillbilly Woman, and I wish I was joking. They heard a small, timid voice come from the partially open front door. Howdy, can I come in, or yun's onlyest mail order? A young, very pregnant woman stood peeking through a small opening in the big glass door. Her clothes looked like Goodwill would have thrown them out, and her greasy hair was covered with an equally worn old cloth. An attempt to be what the locals called an Amish wannabe. When she smiled, her teeth showed several rotten spots which screamed of bad breath. Altogether, the poor girl grabbed the girl's heartstrings as someone pitiful and in need of a friend. Now, I just personally took so much offense to this because it felt like Debi was looking down on people who come from, honestly, backgrounds like mine. When I was a kid, I had a lot of hand-me-down clothes, second-hand clothes, stuff like that. And some of them did get worn out a lot. Some of them, you know, I'd have to wear until they were too small for me. Like, it's embarrassing. I still remember being told off by a PE teacher in school because she thought I wasn't wearing proper football socks in PE, where it turns out they were just too small for me and didn't come up far enough my leg because, you know, as a PE kit, we couldn't afford to get me a new one, so I had these old socks. And then when the teacher realised, she was really embarrassed, and then I was really embarrassed, and I was like, okay. And other than that, I'm someone who's had a lot of dental problems as well as my whole bad overbite thing. I have maybe 16 or so fillings in my mouth. Like, I have more teeth that are filled than aren't. These front ones here, at the top, all fillings. All have white fillings. I have been where this woman was in terms of, you know, black spots in the front of your teeth. And no, it doesn't give you bad breath. It just can be painful and it doesn't look good and you get bullied a lot for it. As a teenager, it was a nightmare. I got called so many names and it made me feel so completely ugly and I was ashamed of myself and it really gave me a lot of self-esteem issues for a really, really long time. So seeing Debi describe this woman in this way, in a way that, like, honestly I relate to, and then seeing, like, this disgusted pity that the characters have towards her and stuff, it just personally makes me a bit upset, and I think it's unnecessary, I think it's mean, I think it's rude, I think it's disrespectful, and it bothers me a lot. Like, a lot, you know? Anyway, the woman says her name is Zula May, as she says, I was named after some fancy movie star my daddy once saw. We live next door to some Amish, and we are plain living like they is, but we ain't Amish. They's German-like, so they's talk funny. And here's where Debi kind of slips up a bit, I think. This bit was weird to me. It's like one throwaway sentence, but like, so Hope is Cheyenne's mother and married to Malachi. And Hope and Malachi are almost definitely the Debi and Michael self-insert characters. But I also kind of got the impression that she sees Cheyenne as like a younger version of herself, or maybe like a version of the self she wants to be or wishes she was, or something like that. So I think Cheyenne is to some extent a self-insert character as well. And I think we sort of see this sort of slip up here because in this scene that Hope isn't even in, Debi writes Hope's reaction to this woman instead of Cheyenne's. And like I say, Hope isn't even in this scene. The pregnant girl's voice was more hillbilly than Hope had ever thought to sound. Do you mean Cheyenne? Are you getting the characters mixed up because you think they're both yourself? It confused me. I don't get it. Very odd. Anyway, and then they all stand around and like judge her looks and whisper behind her back and stuff, and it's really rude. But despite them all judging her, she seems way nicer than what they do. The pregnant lady looked highly impressed with Cheyenne. Are you that Indian gal folks talk about that makes a stuff that can bring folks back from their dead? And once again, let's remember that anytime Debi says Indian, she means Native American. It annoys me so much. Anyway, Cheyenne feigns ignorance of the miracle jam, and then they start discussing other things like, did yuns here in South America, they's found a whole string of villages, part near 20,000 people, dead with some kinda plague. They's a thinking it was the rats that brought in the fleas. This is so hard to read. These accents are unnecessary. So Zula's like, I'm worried about rats as well, and she asks for some herbs to kill rats so her family won't get the plague. Seriously, not even joking, wish I was. This is a plot point. But again, we never actually see the plague. We never see anyone suffering from it. We never see anyone get ill. We never hear about it being in the area. We never even know what the effects of it are. We're just told, oh, there's a plague somewhere and it's bad. Be scared of it. Yancey then starts laughing at her, which, to be honest, I think that's what all of us reading are doing, but we're supposed to see him as the bad guy as this, you know? And also it is really rude to laugh to someone's face like this, so there's that, especially when she's scared. So Yancey's laughing, and Zula responds with, Ewan's kin mock if'n you want to, but I'm a-telling you as something's bad is gonna happens. This dialogue is so difficult to read. So difficult. Basically, you can mock us if you want, but something bad's gonna happen. Why not just write that? It's so much easier. I knowed about things like this here. I got the gift, and I smell death. Ne'er been wrong in all my born days, and don't 'spect I'm wrong now. You're gonna see death within a yar. Bodies are laying in the streets. Maybe your body, city boy. Sounds a little bit more like a threat than a warning to me, but here we are. Yancey's mockery and his courage had failed him, and now he looked genuinely perturbed. To cover his unease and as a way to strike back, he put his camera to his eye and began taking pictures of the strange character. The pregnant woman took it to be an insult, like she was some kind of oddity. She turned back on him with a show of dismissal and disdain. Disdain again. Disdain. God. Another thing I've noticed is that Debi gets her her like tuz and twos mixed up a lot, you know, like as in like I'm going to the shop, grab a chocolate bar too. She doesn't know how to distinguish between them in her writing. That's another problem. Did she not have an editor on this? Anyway, as I said earlier, as well as being rude and potentially illegal to just start taking photos of a stranger like this for no reason, a telephoto lens would not capture anything useful in this scenario, in this sort of close setting of a shop like this. Even if it managed to focus on her, you'd probably just get some little close-up, like, you know, this bit of the head, that sort of thing. It just, no. These photos are going to show nothing. Debbie knows nothing about cameras. Cheyenne then tells Yancey to shut your mouth or get out, and Zulame tells Magdalene she smells death and blood on her, and she offers them all a warning of, I seemed the foreigner watching you from behind the sign near the alley, watching, and ominously claims, he knows, pointing at Yancey. And that's where the chapter ends. There we go. This whole chapter is just so much horrific dialogue upon horrific dialogue upon horrific dialogue without anything actually happening. Also, if Zulame has never spoken to or interacted with the stranger, how does she know he's a foreigner? Or is she just basing that on his appearance and her own racist views? As we start the next chapter, something happens off page again. Like, there's no drama in this book. There's nothing interesting happening. We don't get to see the actual action-y bits or the aftermath. We're just told these things happened and we just have to expect it and then watch people sit around and talk about it, and it's boring. This book is offensive, obviously, but it's boring as well, and for me that's the worst combination, you know? A boring book I can tolerate if it's just bland. An offensive book, I can be like, this is horrible, but it's so entertaining because it's so horrible. This book is boring and horrible. The worst possible combination. I hate you. I really hate you. So Malachi and Hope, the Michael and Debi Pearl characters, are driving through the town after having been away. Apparently they'd flown out to California where they ministered to a growing home church that had adopted the Swahili-speaking people as their first missionary project. The eager young families had conducted various bake sales, lawn jobs, and even a few storage buildings to raise money for the translation and printing of God's story in their chosen language. Hope says, wasn't it just wonderful seeing all those fine children so thrilled to help get the gospel out to people in the other side of the world? Malachi was grunting his own joy when Hope's startled jerk brought him to extreme wariness. Drama, something's happening, excitement, intrigue. No, not really, no. What they've seen is the doors to the last publisher's building left wide open when they shouldn't be. We'll talk more about that in a second, but first I want to talk about a few things. One, I hate this almost like infantilization of people who don't speak English. As I mentioned briefly earlier, Debbie does it a lot throughout this book and her other work, and it really, really bothers me. It actually reminds me a bit of, you know that part in Modern Family when Gloria says to, actually I can't remember who she's speaking to, but she says, she's talking about being bilingual and being frustrated, and she says something along the lines of like, do you know how smart I am in Spanish? And like, I kind of love that. And I think it's something that a lot of people forget about people who are speaking in a second language, you know? That is a huge skill within itself. I'm terrible with languages, so I have a lot of respect for people who can do it. And I think people seem to think that just because someone might be having trouble translating something, that doesn't mean they don't understand it fully. They can still be very intelligent and very smart. And in some ways, they're probably even more intelligent and smart than we give them credit for, because they're taking these complex ideas and then having to explain them in a language that they weren't necessarily brought up with, and that's amazing and incredible. And yeah. The other thing is Debbie has this whole sort of like white saviour complex thing going on, and definitely seems to think that anyone who's not white or anyone who doesn't speak English or both is somehow stupider than her, less developed than her, and needs to be treated like a child and trained into the right way of thinking, and it's really, really disgusting and it bothers me a lot. Anyway, Malachi and Hope find that someone tried to set fire to all of the books inside the publishers, but God put out the fire just in time because he can do that. Only a few books got burnt. God saved them all going up. So, to give context, in this book so far, actual angels have come to speak with a dying old lady. God has spoken directly to Debbie in a dream. God put out some books that were on fire. He's allowed them to make a miracle jam that can bring things back from the dead, but he didn't intervene to stop Magdalene, a child, being repeatedly raped and abused and assaulted. He's just fine with that happening, apparently. Or when Derek killed the dog in the last section, God's just fine with that. Let it happen, why not? No need to get involved here. This bothers me so much. If this was any other like fantasy book, we'd all be in uproar about plot holes and the logic not making sense. Why would this all-powerful being interfere here, here, and here, but not in the serious things here and here? You know? It bothers me. In such a cliche, this book burning was apparently done by Muslim terrorists again, blah blah blah. Hope granted, they intended to burn the whole place down. Look, Malachi, they sprayed Allah Akbar on the front wall. Well, that makes it clear what this is all about, which again kind of shows how little Debbie knows about things, because in her world they all speak Arabic really well, and if they'd actually written this, then they'd have probably written it like this spelling instead of this spelling. And it's important to realise that this isn't an inherently awful phrase. This phrase isn't like a threat or something like that. It's just a sort of like Arabic version of a like, yeah, praise God sort of thing, you know? Yeah, it's been co-opted by some bad people in the past, but not all people who use the phrase are bad people. Not all people who use the phrase mean harm. And to keep using it in this way in fiction and like making it out to be this awful thing that like, oh, if they say this, they're terrorists, is just perpetuating these really harmful stereotypes, and it's not okay, you know? The old man smiled. By all rights, this place should have burnt to the ground. God fireproofed 3 Hebrew children, so I don't reckon a warehouse would be any problem for him. Let's pray. In the next section of the book, Louise, Ash's waitress friend from the very first chapter, suddenly shows up out of nowhere. She had sold her diner and come to Tennessee, just as Asher had suggested. The Muslim problem was getting worse by the day. The city had adopted Sharia law. She was glad to be out of the place. Hope had put Louise to work in the kitchen within hours. Then Malachi gives this big speech to like everyone from the publishers and the church and all this sort of thing, which literally just rehashes everything we just read literally 2 pages ago, and then everyone prays together. Again, it's just a lot of people sitting around talking about things that have already happened and repeating things we've already read. It's boring. Then Malachi goes on this whole like, oh my god, white Christians are so persecuted. Oh, we are the real victims in all of this kind of rant, and it really bothers me. He's all like, oh, boo-hoo-hoo, why does everyone think we're the bad guys? All we want to do is convert everyone else in the world to think the same way we do. That's not that bad, right? Yes it is. Stop it. The lack of self-awareness is just really something else, you know? And please remember when I read this, Debbie says this book is entirely based on reality and what is happening in the world and what could very easily happen in the world. So she really believes that white Christians are the victims in life. Malachi says, we're at that point where Bible-believing Christians are hated by the nations, the United Nations. For nearly every nation has signed on to the Universal Child Protection Bill, which makes it a crime to teach children the precepts of the Bible. They can teach the Quran or Buddhist and Hindu literature to their children. I'm interested, Debbie. What is this Buddhist and Hindu literature you talk about? Do you want to give it a name? Maybe? Do you want to tell me you know anything about it? Who is this they exactly? Anyway, they can even teach their children to hate Christians and Jews, but it is a crime for us to teach the Bible. They refer to us as fundamentalists, fanatics. They say we are hateful and a menace to the New World Order. It is a war with the devil for the minds of men. We do not go into the battle with guns and grenades. We go with a sword. The sword of the Word of God. But, even as the old minister poured out his heart, 8 Muslim men huddled in the small storage room in the back of the tobacco shop, reading the latest email from an imam in New York City. He's due to arrive back in 2 days. He is bringing the explosives with him. Allah Akbar. Really? You really think terrorists would be casually sending emails like that to each other? What is this like, Muslim terrorists at hotmail.co.uk? Lol, got the bombs, see you soon, babes. No, this isn't how it works. Stop it. Debbie wouldn't actually want us to hear something interesting happening in the plot, so we have to go back to Malachi droning on for, seriously, another 6 pages. He just gives a full-on sermon for 6 and a bit pages, more if you count the bit before, full of Bible quotes, rehashing everything we already know, and then being like, now let's all pray together. And then we get pages and pages of people just praying. It's boring. Sorry. The reason we're here tonight is to teach those of you who are ready to go forward what you must do to prepare yourself for this spiritual war. It is possible, I guess I should say likely, that if you continue with me in this publishing ministry, you will be risking your life, and maybe the lives of your loved ones. Michael and Debbie really do think a lot of themselves, don't they? They really do. Their delusions of grandeur that they have are just something else. This whole idea of because like I say, they're self-inserts, and all the books they talk about in this, that the last publishers have published, are actual books that Michael and Debbie have published themselves. Their God's Story book in this is a self-insert of Michael's book that he's written himself called Good and Evil, which is, just like God's Story, a graphic novel about basically a condensed version of the Bible that's meant to make it accessible, that Michael and Debbie have fed crap tons of money into trying to get translated into language after language after language. They've got like tens and tens of different language versions of this book available on their website for like $25, $35 each, something like that, a lot of money. But they're basically doing in real life what the characters are doing in this book. When Malachi and Hope have these delusions of grandeur, what we're actually seeing are Michael and Debbie's, you know? This idea of oh my god, our books are so good and so important that they're the only things that can save all of humanity ever. That sounds stupid and ridiculous, and we can be like, ha ha ha, can't believe they think that. But that's really what Michael and Debbie think about their books in real life. And that is kind of terrifying. I have had a dream, a vision if you will. I believe God has given me the privilege of publishing the gospel to the Muslim people. Malachi was overcome with inexpressible emotion. He leaned over the podium and began to weep in earnest. Both Julie and Cheyenne, sitting 3 rows back, broke into sobs, although neither could have explained why. This is so melodramatic and unnecessary. Just please stop. Come on. So, with Malachi in tears, Omar steps up to tell us about Malachi's dream. Personally, I'd rather hear Christopher Biggins singing it, but here we are.
There I was standing with baskets of bread.
So this is Omar speaking. In his dream, he was with Muslim people crowded into a tight group. Then, as the camera began moving out for a wider angle, the picture revealed the group was bigger and bigger until he could not see any end to the people, and each one was reaching out his hand trying to receive a copy of God's Story. It was almost within their reach. Other Muslims came with swords and began to slay the men, women and children until they all lay dead. Hundreds of thousands of precious Muslims fell beneath the sword of their own leaders. The dream awakened in Malachi a vision for reaching the Muslim people with the gospel. Malachi began asking God to provide necessary funds to mass produce and distribute God's storybook, to make it available through multiple sites on the web, free of charge, in the Arabic language. Damn, they really care about getting the Christian religion out there, don't they? And they really need a book to do it. If only there was already some other book out there that had all the teachings of the Christian religion in there, that had already been translated into thousands of languages and was already available online for free and able to access anywhere in the world. If only such a book existed. Seriously, the ego of these people to think that their little cartoon storybook is so magical that all people need to do is read it and they'll be converted. It's just insane. If the Bible hasn't managed it, your little cartoons won't either. Omar goes on. Just think, Saudi Arabia is closed up airtight against the gospel. Anyone caught with a Bible or Christian literature would be subject to death. No missionary can go there and share his message. But we can go there, directly into the private rooms of everyone who has access to the web. The rulers of Saudi Arabia will be able to secretly read God's story and understand fully the message of salvation. Our little digital missionaries cannot be arrested. If they block one website, we'll open up 10 more. As long as a Muslim has access to the web, he will have the gospel at his fingertips. Terrorists hiding in caves in Afghanistan who have satellite web access will be able to see the gospel in a beautiful presentation. We will be targeted. Apparently we are already in their sights. This coming ministry is both glorious and dreadful, and I feel like I'm just tripping up over my words here because I don't even know how to address this. On to chapter 13, and we hear that Ash's stay in Thailand has been extended, so Cheyenne has been grumpy, but Yancey has been visiting the herb den lots. Would they like him now, or he's changed his anti-Semitic views? We don't actually know. He could still be awful. He's just around more for a reason. There's no explanation given. We're not really told anything of actual importance, to be fair. The women are working again, and again, I have to wonder, why isn't Magdalene in school? She's a young teen. She probably isn't older than 15. Why isn't she in school? Why are they working her? Aren't there child labour laws against this? Then there's a scene of Bobby Joe just being a cruel bully again, and it makes me really uncomfortable. This is horrible. This bothers me. This really, really bothers me, actually. So they're all sat around working, right? And as they do, Bobby Joe decides she's going to start telling this Bible story. So blah, 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 she gets to it. And then she gets this part about a dog when Magdalene interrupts because she's hungry. And she asks if they can go get food, which I think is a pretty reasonable question to interrupt someone's story with. Like, yeah, you don't really want to interrupt, that's a little bit rude. But when you're like, hey, I'm hungry, can we get food? It's like, yeah, okay, let's do that. And then continue telling your story while we're doing this. Like, it's fair enough, I think. But Bobby Joe responds by, and I'm not joking, barking at her like a dog. Full on, woo, 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 like barking in her face. And Bobby Joe grabbed Magdalene by her shoulders and began shaking her back and forth while barking and growling like a mad dog. And I just want to point out here that while we don't actually get told an actual age for Bobby Joe, we're later told that her only potential love interest is 8 years younger than her, and he's still an adult. So I'm going to say Bobby Joe's probably between like 28 and 32-ish, I think. So let's call it 30, based around Debbie's crazy ideas about fertility and having kids and all that stuff. So a woman my age is barking like a dog, physically assaulting a child who has been previously assaulted, abused, and raped, and this is just meant to be okay. Oh, and here's the other thing, right? This child is 15 years old and like absolutely tiny, and Bobby Joe is later described as being 10 inches taller and at least 50 pounds heavier than Magdalene. So it feels even more cruel. Imagine someone nearly a foot taller than you, that much bigger than you and heavier than you, shaking you and barking like a dog in your face only months after you've been rescued from rape and abuse and assault. Magdalene looked like a limp, white-headed ragdoll in Bobby Joe's hands. She began to whimper, and I'm not surprised why. Bobby Joe's voice remained gruff as she shoved the teenager to one side. Don't you ever interrupt one of my stories again. I'm through with your spoiled self-centeredness. Got it? Magdalene silently nodded. This is cruel. The only spoiled self-centered person I see here is Bobby Joe. Seriously, cruel. And while Cheyenne tried to ask Bobby Joe what she was doing at first, she then stopped and let Bobby Joe carry on, and they just accept this behaviour as completely normal because apparently Cheyenne and Julie glanced at each other. They both now understood that what had happened was cruel, but necessary. Without respect, there could never be true friendship. What the hell is this? No, nothing about this says respect. I wouldn't respect someone who treated me like this. And someone who respects you doesn't treat you like this either. There's no respect on either side going on here, and this isn't going to make it happen. Debbie consistently throughout this book and all her other books mixes up respect for fear and obedience. It's disgusting. This isn't how friends treat each other. Not at all. Actually, it's like in Emerson's book, the Love and Respect one that we reviewed on my channel like last time I made a video. That absolutely mixed up respect and obedience. Absolutely it did. And I'm wondering if this is like a problem amongst certain Christians who follow these same teachings that the Pearls do and that Emerson Eggerichs does. I wonder if they kind of have the same sort of beliefs around this idea of respect and it's kind of warped and messed up. Interesting, I don't know. After a while, and like things have calmed down, and by the way, Magdalene never gets any food, she's just made to go hungry. So they talk about the Bible for a while, and then Magdalene lets slip that she met one of them young Muslim girls, and apparently her parents are the folks that bought Main Street Market. She was just sitting in the car parked in the back lot. Her head was leaning forward with all that headgear on. I couldn't tell if she was crying or what. Spoiler, she wasn't crying, she was playing a game on her phone, you know, like teenagers do. So Magdalene thinks it's appropriate to try and convert her by like banging on her window, scaring her, and being like, hey, 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 read God's story on our website, do this, read this. And the women are like, oh my god, did you put yourself in danger? Did you put her in danger? Spoiler, she did. And then in a completely bizarre and unprovoked twist, while they're discussing this, Bobby Joe, this woman, I swear, she decides to bang her hand down on the table. Sorry, I realised that was near the microphone. She bangs her hand down on the table, completely out of nowhere, jumps up on the sofa, puts her foot on the table, and then she pulled the hem of her loose tie fisherman's pants up and removed her Charter Arms stub-nosed .38 pistol from its ankle holster. Maybe the reason we haven't seen old Raghead is because he heard me through his listening device talking about my shooting iron and how I'm not afraid to use it. This is offensive and terrifying. One, the use of the phrase old Raghead is not okay at all. Two, waving around a gun, not normal, not okay, dangerous, stop it. Three, another error here. I know nothing about guns, so I had to Google this one. But apparently, stub-nosed pistols aren't a thing, but snub-nosed pistols are. Funny, Debbie could have just like maybe, I don't know, Googled the gun before she included it in her book, but here we are. Another reason to not like Bobby Joe. This woman is insane, and also, doesn't it just make the last scene even more terrifying? You have a 30-year-old woman shaking a child, barking at her like a dog, knowing she has an armed gun on her. Anyway, the next section of the book gets weird, right? We see grown women and this one teenage girl all sat around at work playing Truth or Dare together, because that's definitely something sober adults do together regularly, right? This game is all to set up Magdalene finally telling us about her past and what happened to her, and what happened to her is really horrible, but you could kind of tell she wasn't ready to tell this story, and the girls manipulated and threatened and like blackmailed it out of her. It's really horrible, right? Now, before I start reading this, remember, this is a girl in her early teens, probably no older than 15, so all of this stuff happening to her is happening to a child. Remember this, it's horrible, heartbreaking. She tells the women, I was doing drugs. I supported myself by turning tricks. I didn't care who they were as long as I could eat and do drugs. This short, fat dude picked me up. He took me to get a hamburger and Coke. This fat guy told me to sit in the car while he went in to get the food. Instead of getting anything for himself, he kept drinking out of a bottle he kept in the car. He called it a tonic or something and said it would make him my Superman. Ugh. Also, weirdly, take note at this point, they're in a car. A car. Anyway, Magdalene thinks he might have spiked her drink because I can't remember a thing after I finished eating. I can't even remember how he got me way out into the woods. All I know is I woke up and I was on the ground with him putting a red hot piece of iron on me. I was so drugged, I couldn't even fight or do anything to stop him. I felt the heat and could smell my skin burning, but I couldn't move. It hurt, like I was burning in hell, but I couldn't even scream. I really did think he was going to kill me. One minute he had this evil look, like he was really enjoying himself. Then he started puking like something exploded inside of him or something. And then, as he pukes, the attacker gets up to leave on a motorcycle. I don't know where this motorcycle has come from. It's very confusing. They were in a car. Debbie's terrible for timelines and things like this, right? So she wants us to believe that he spiked her drink, drove hours out to a forest in the middle of nowhere, because this forest is way away from everything else that happened. Middle of nowhere. And you'll see why in a second. So he drove hours out into the forest, in the middle of nowhere, dropped her off, drove back, left the car somewhere, picked up a motorbike, drove back, attacked her, and then, while puking, drove off on the motorcycle. And all of this happened in a couple of hours, while she was drugged. It's ridiculous, it's unbelievable, it makes no sense. So the women are silent as she's telling this absolutely horrific story of something no one should ever have to go through, never mind a child. And their only response is from Julie, who says, "You poor thing, I'm so sorry." And then nothing else, which really isn't enough, is it? No asking how she is, no more expressions of sympathy, just that. I don't think it's enough. There's no compassion or empathy from any of these women. Also, sorry if you can hear Kyra eating in the background. I've been filming a long time, so she's getting a little bit bored. So I've just given her snack tray to play with. It's really cute. It's this like play tray, and it has all these different compartments, and she has to move all the bits around to find the snacks hidden in them. She loves it. She has so much fun with it. So if you can hear her in the background in the other room, she's busy doing that. Sorry, but you know, she's me baby. Magdalene goes back to saying that she wandered around the forest for hours trying to find a way out, but it's literally proper middle of nowhere. But then she finds a house. She thinks it's probably her attacker's house, and apparently it has spots that look like shallow graves out back, which is horrifying, right? The house is also stocked with like a crap ton of non-perishable foods, like tins and cans and stuff like that. And Magdalene says she stays in the house for 3 months without this guy coming back at all. Eats the food stored there, goes through crazy drug withdrawal, and then gets away eventually by floating down the river when the weather was warmer. They get her to describe her attacker to them, and she says, he was around 35 years old, really short, maybe 5'5". Again, side note, that's really not that short. My dad's 5'4". It's not really short. Anyway. Must have been 250 pounds. A seriously fat dude. His head was almost bald, and what hair he did have was thin and stringy, and as pale as mine. He had a big rotten hole right between his front teeth. His hands were gnarled like he had arthritis in them, and he stumbled like he had a bad knee when he got out of the car. And at this description, the women are like, oh my god, it's Derek! Derek attacked you! We know him! Oh, Derek! And again, I have to say, this is not the man you just described. This is not... They're not... But anyway, they think it's Derek, the guy from the first part of the book who killed the dog and wanted to rape Cheyenne. He's not a believable villain. Yeah, obviously he's awful. He does awful things. He has awful motives and all this stuff. But he's like a caricature of a villain, and you can't take the things he does seriously because he's just all awful. And there's no real motivation for anything he does. There's no real depth to him as a character. He doesn't have a personality outside, ooh, I just want to rape a hot girl. The women then decide that they can't possibly go to the police because the police force is all corrupt and related to Derek, so there's that. I think from the first part there's something like the sheriff's his dad, and the judge in the area is his granddad, something like that, so yeah, whatever. And then Magdalene tells us about her childhood, but it really bothers me because, again, here's a kid who's talking about this like genuinely awful trauma and assault and rape she's been through, and Debbie still finds a way to shame her as though like she let it happen to herself. She's the reason it happened. This is all her fault. Like Debbie describes her telling the story in a whiny, childish voice. Now, you might disagree with me, but I think if anyone's allowed to speak in a whiny, childish voice, it's a child who's been abused and assaulted and raped, you know? I think that gives you a pass. I think that gives you a pass to be whiny and childish, you know? Magdalene tries to tell them at first that her dad hit her when she was a kid, but for some reason they all act like that's completely unbelievable. I don't know why. And they tell her to cut the crap, tell the truth, or I'm out of here. Bobby Joe had a keen sense for deception. Fine, liar, get your stuff together. I've spent several weeks trying to hide my purse from your thieving fingers. I'm tired of your drama. It's someone else's turn to put up with your duplicity. Get up, I'm taking you to the cops. So they're literally saying, tell us everything about your traumatic past, or we hand you over to the people working with the man who drugged, kidnapped, assaulted, and raped you. What a lovely Christian woman. What kindness she shows. How does Debbie expect us to not hate Bobby Joe? So, faced with this threat, obviously, Magdalene reluctantly tells them the truth about her childhood. Apparently, she grew up in a really strict Fundy family, and she was homeschooled until her dad had a falling out with the church they went to, and he fell in with a bunch of white supremacists. Her mum got really close with a Jewish woman called Alice and started getting really into like more fundamental Judaism than Christianity. Then Magdalene says about her own mother, Dad said Mum and Alice were spiritual lesbians. At first it seemed like a nasty thing to say, but after a while I saw his point. Yeah, side with the homophobic racist instead of the woman harmlessly practicing her faith with a friend. Magdalene spends a lot of time blaming her mother for everything that happened, which is really gross. I really don't see the mother as doing anything all that wrong, except maybe, like, not leaving the dad, but she was scared, so you know, how much can you blame her? Then apparently Magdalene's brother ran off and got addicted to the drugs, and then comes back to take Magdalene to a party so he can pimp her out to his friends in return for more drugs. Apparently, his friends like fresh meat, really young girls, virgins, especially blondes. And so this child is repeatedly raped by his friends so he can do drugs, and then she gets addicted to drugs, and then eventually she falls pregnant. So of course we get one of Debi's anti-choice forced pregnancy rants, because Debi can't possibly see Magdalene as the victim of abuse. She can only see her as a dirty, disgusting sinner who must be shamed for everything she's ever done. Magdalene admits that she had an abortion, and Julie just bursts into tears on the spot. They're far more emotive and upset about the prospect of a child aborting her rapist baby than they are about hearing Magdalene, also a child, being kidnapped, raped, and abused. That bothers me a lot. Oh, and to make things worse, do you know why she had the abortion? Well, racism. I got pregnant, but the father was long gone. I finally told Dad. He just stood there and sobbed like a baby. He didn't cry because I was into drugs or pregnant, but because I was carrying a black baby. Dad kept saying, "Pure Aryan blood. You have tainted pure Aryan blood." I just have no words. Anyway, then it's full of awful cliches and misinformation about abortion. If you'd like to hear me correct this sort of misinformation, then I recommend my video about the LeBrant abortion documentary. I go through all the kind of science in that and talk about why it's wrong and point out why it's wrong and all that sort of stuff. I'll link that video in the description if you want. I don't want to kind of like rehash too much of that in this one, so we'll just cover some of the basics. Magdalene says, "I was over 7 months along before I went to Planned Parenthood." This is not normal. People don't usually decide to get an abortion this late into pregnancy, and generally abortions aren't performed this late unless it's necessary to save the life of the mother, or if the fetus has some sort of debilitating illness or deformity or genetic abnormality, which is going to cause it to likely suffer or die anyway, you know? Most abortions are done before 12 weeks of pregnancy. Like, we're talking like 90% of them done before that time, I think, or 85. I can't remember the stats off the top of my head. They're in the LeBrant video. But most of them are done that early on. So few people rock up to anywhere at 7 months pregnant and say, "You know what, I quite fancy an abortion. Want to?" And I don't think any doctor would agree to that. In the UK, that's illegal. I don't know about the laws in America, but it just seems very, very unlikely. It's pure fear-mongering misinformation. That's all this is. Now, this next bit is quite interesting, but in a bad way. Debi doesn't want to describe the actual process of having an abortion, because that wouldn't be scary enough. And I think she feels like she can't just outright lie about what it is. So she gets around this in a sneaky way to make it sound worse than it is without technically lying. Magdalene says, "When I arrived, there was a group of pro-life people in the parking lot. They told me how the doctor would give me medicine to bring on labour, then stick a giant needle in the baby's head as she was coming down to be born. Then he would suck her brains out and dump her in a garbage pail." And that's all Debi says about what the abortion process is. Do you notice that? Debi only describes what the protesters told Magdalene would happen, not what actually happened. Because that's not how abortions are performed. That's not what an abortion is. Again, if you want to find out how abortions actually work, go see the LeBrant video I made. So Debi was technically truthful here because, yeah, it's likely pro-lifers would say something like that. But it's still spreading misinformation about abortion because she's implying that this is what abortions are, and it's not. Does that make sense? Very annoying. Very, very tricksy. And then it gets worse. Like the talking fetus from the film Blonde worse, you know? And that was bad. When I got in there, they ran an ultrasound. The nurses forgot to turn the monitor away, and I saw that my baby was a girl. No, you didn't. You're a child. You're not trained to read an ultrasound and figure out the sex of a partially developed fetus in a couple of seconds. You couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. None of this is believable. If you're not smart enough to have basic sex education and know what condoms are, you're not smart enough to be able to tell the sex of a partially developed fetus on an ultrasound screen. No. That takes training. They're hard to read. It's hard to tell. No, I don't believe it. But it gets worse. I actually heard her cry. For a moment, I named her Starlight. No, you didn't. No, stop it. No. Crap like this annoys the hell out of me. It makes me so angry. Actual people who need it are being denied healthcare right now because idiots, malicious, nasty idiots like Debi Pearl are spreading misinformation like this. Callous, ridiculous misinformation around abortion, and people are falling for it. It makes me so angry. The response to all this is, instead of saying to Magdalene something like, "Oh love, I think you need a therapist. Let's help you." Instead of that, they just tell her that she needs to contact her racist, emotionally abusive father and can't understand why she gets upset and says no to that. So Cheyenne just starts praying. The next chapter is super boring, so we're just going to skip over quite a bit of it. But for summary, we learn Ash is back from Thailand now, but we don't actually see him. And he's still not doing anything. He's not adding anything to the plot. Nothing, so yeah. At most, Cheyenne is excited that he's back, and Bobby Joe's like really rude to her about it because she's an awful friend and an awful person and just mocks people for no reason. And then they all just sit around telling each other Bible stories for like 8 to 10 pages. It's dull. At the end of this big long conversation, a note is slipped under the door of the herb den by the little Muslim girl, and it says, "Something bad is gonna happen. You need to leave. I'm sorry. Your friend." Ooh, scary. And then the women are just like, "Oh my god, you've heard of Muslim honor killings, right? They'll kill her. They'll definitely kill her." And yes, Muslim honor killings are awful and bad and should be spoken about, but Debi Pearl is not the right person to be doing that, and she shouldn't be spreading harmful, fear-mongering misinformation about it instead of actual information that can help the women who, are affected by it. Anyway, okay, so the women are like, "Oh, they'll kill her if we tell anyone. Better stay silent and do literally nothing. That's okay, I'm sure we won't really be in danger." Spoiler, they are. But then Debi adds a footnote about honor killings, which wouldn't be so bad if her source wasn't Fox News. I know. In the next chapter, Asher finally shows up, he finally does something, and he turns Cheyenne into a dirty sinner. They're both scared of the nasty Muslims, and so they actually, in fear, they hug. I know, it's disgusting, it's disgraceful. I can't believe Debi actually wrote this smut, but listen to this. This could get me demonetized, so bear with me here. He shook his head, then pulled her into a full, hard embrace. In public! On Main Street! Just when respectable folks were heading to work! This actually reads like a parody of itself. It's too much. Oh, for God's sake. Then Asher warns Cheyenne that through his contacts with the feds, he knows she's in danger and he's been praying super hard over it. So eventually he gets her to agree to move her shop out of her shop and go work in the publisher's building so they can set up security and stuff. She agrees, but she's like, "Oh, but I do have to go to the supermarket for more herb supplies." Even though she's been explicitly told by 2 people her life's in danger, she's like, "No, the smart thing to do here is go alone." So she does. So she's wandering around the supermarket when she gets scared of seeing a Muslim man, because in this world all Muslims are terrorists, and this is just gross. It's so gross. She's there reaching for the yogurt, where it's a big thing. Debi makes a big thing about her buying yogurt. I don't get it either. But she's reaching for the yogurt when her ear caught a sound that was both familiar and odd at the same time. What language? Cheyenne froze. Her whole body tingled as survival instinct kicked into high gear. Her heart thundered in her ears. She swept the area with eyes intensely alert. Black eyes met hers. She struggled to reconcile her alarm with what she was hearing and seeing. He stood over 40 feet away holding a cell phone to his ear. When he realized she'd seen him, he dropped his head down to stare at the floor. "Arabic! Don't freak. He has a right to shop here, talk on the phone, be here." She intentionally avoided looking into his face, but she checked his buggy contents with her peripheral vision. The cart was nearly full of paint thinner and paint remover. He seemed out of place in the store. He appeared to be watching her out of the corner of his eye, just as she was watching him. Now, there is a word for when people are scared of and intolerant of people for no other reason than their race, religion, or the language they're speaking. And, hang on, let me try and think what that word is. Oh, that... racist. This whole book is playing into harmful and dangerous racist stereotypes, and it's not okay at all. So, while Cheyenne is busy having this prejudice-fueled panic attack, she bumps into Zula May, the pregnant woman from the herb shop earlier. And Zula goes into a full-on, "Ooh, I'm having a vision" mode, and it's very odd. Zula May groaned, "Death, I smell it. He done gots the evil eye. Doers of darkness done followed you higher herb gal. My bones tell me of a truth." Why has she written it like this? Why? Oh my god, sorry. Anyway. But hey look, another case of a woman being blamed for something bad. Of course it's Cheyenne's fault that the bad man followed her here. Why did she come here? Why did she lead him here? This is all her fault, obviously, because she's the woman. The fire in Zula's eyes intensified. "Lord help us. Land's sake, gal. They's gonna blow up this place." A slight ringing of a phone at the opposite end of the aisle caused both women to turn in time to see the Arabic man looking straight at Cheyenne. So he notices her, she notices him, and then she starts running through the supermarket shouting, "Run! Get out! Bomb! Hurry! Get out!" Literally. Now, call me crazy, but for me, making eye contact with a man isn't proof that he's gonna set off a bomb. I too struggle with eye contact. It's the autism, don't like it. But the few times that I have made eye contact with people, surprisingly, no bomb has been detonated, so wild, I know. But maybe I am just stupid because it turns out there is a bomb. There is! Oh my god. Debbie actually wants us to believe that in the 10 minutes that Cheyenne was walking around the shop, again, timeline issues. This all takes place over about 10 minutes, right? Cheyenne goes into the shop, the Muslim man follows her in, makes a phone call, collects paint thinner, collects fertilizer as well, makes a bomb in the shop, runs out of the shop, and sets it off. All in 10 minutes. Seriously, Debbie ends this chapter with a news article in which she writes, "They have determined that chemicals and supplies within the store were assembled to ignite volatile ingredients in an elaborate scheme." Now, I've probably ended up on some sort of watch list myself, because in trying to fact check this, I spent a while googling bomb making and how it's done, how long bomb making takes, what you need and all this sort of thing, and I can conclude that I'm probably on a watch list, and this is impossible. Nevertheless, Cheyenne and Zula May make it out of the shop, get to Cheyenne's truck, there's a big explosion, it kills like 10 people, and then Zula May goes into labour in the back of Cheyenne's truck. So Cheyenne grabs a random man who's like stumbling out of the wreckage, head bleeding, and instead of checking on him, she's like, "Hey, drive us to the hospital," and throws her keys at him. I would not want someone with a head injury who's just been in an explosion driving me to the hospital, but maybe that's just me. Turns out Zula May is only 6 months along in her pregnancy, and yet she gives birth to 2 premature twins in the back of the truck with barely any complications, all in about 15 minutes, something like that. Again, dodgy timelines. And it's weird because I know Debbie's given birth herself. I know she's got a hell of a lot of grandkids as well, so I imagine she's probably been there through a hell of a lot of births. But this is one of the least realistic birth scenes I have ever read in my life. I know trauma can bring on early labour and complications and stuff like that, but Zula May manages to go from, "I'm 6 months pregnant, no sign of anything happening yet," to, "Yeah, the first baby has completely turned itself round in the womb and is halfway down the birth canal, and Zula May is almost fully dilated in 10 to 15 minutes. No exaggeration. None at all. It makes no sense. And just like the dog killing scene, Debbie makes this unnecessarily graphic and it's really uncomfortable to read. Cheyenne jerked the young woman's long skirt up, yanking her panties off in one movement. Even in the limited light, she could see the woman's legs were already bloody. Ripping open a bag of paper towels, she scrubbed hard at her hands. Trust me, that's gonna remove literally no bacteria. You're just rubbing it around, making sure you get a nice full coating. What's holding the baby back? The cord! It must be around the neck. Cheyenne was ready when Zula's next scream ripped through the clothes truck. She pushed her fingers into the woman's birthing canal, feeling the hard head of the baby less than 2 inches inside the opening. How is it? She willed her fingers to squeeze in around the baby's head, searching until she felt the cord wrapped tightly around the child's neck. Then she unhooks it, that's fine, and with a rush, the head and then the whole body slid out in an unexpected forceful gush of warm water. The baby lay limp and unmoving, as did the mother. Then Cheyenne massages the kid's chest and the baby starts breathing again, which is all good. That bit is all kind of quite believable because that's actually almost exactly what happened when I was born. I had the cord wrapped around my neck, I wasn't breathing when I was born, whole thing. But to think that this all happened over a period of 10-15 minutes? It's just very unbelievable. My birth happened over a lot more than 5 minutes, and it was in a nice sterile hospital, and I had doctors, and my recovery took much, much longer than the baby takes in this book. It just makes no sense. This is not realistic. And then Zula's like, there's another... Take these accents. Why is Debbie writing them like this? Quickly, Cheyenne righted herself to help. The child came before she had a chance to even register her surprise, almost without effort. And again, I have another problem with this because how has this woman got to 6 months of pregnancy and doesn't know she's having twins? Scans and other healthcare during pregnancy are really, really important. Clearly this woman's not been having any, and Debbie's just like, yeah, that's cool, right? Don't need doctors, and it bothers me. But at least Debbie actually showed us some action on the page for once. Again, the dog death, this, and one more thing in the next section, they're the only bits of actual action we get throughout the book. So she gets some points here for writing this, but minus points for how believable it's all supposed to be. God, I have so many problems with this. And that's where this chapter ends, and I think that's where I'm going to end this video. Up next, we are going to find out what happens in the aftermath of the bombing. Spoiler, not a lot, and we're going to finish the last 120 or so pages of this book. So I still need to write the script for that, although I've got all my notes done, and it is bad. It is really, really bad. I'm going to tell you this now. This book does not have a satisfying ending. This is not a self-contained story. There's no beginning, middle, and end to this plot. It's just a series of events that feel like they're setting up something else that never actually happens. It's very disappointing. On the one hand, I'm glad Debbie didn't write a second book, but on the other, I'm like, but there's no conclusion to this one, so I don't know. Anyway, I'll hopefully be making that video soon, but for now, let me know what you thought of this. I don't even know what to call it. All of this, I don't know. Let me know your thoughts. If you would like to support my channel, I do have Patreon that you can go and support me on over there for as little as $1 a month. Also, if you sign up to any of the higher tiers, I've got some exclusive prints and stickers and stuff like that that's available that gets sent out to you every 3 months, which I think is quite exciting. I've also got new merch available now if you want to get some stuff. I've got some really cool new feminist themed things about my body, my choice. I've got one with a line from one of my latest poems. I've got these cool feminist t-shirts that I absolutely love, and a whole bunch of other really cool stuff that's available now. So if you want to check that out, you can do over on my Teespring store. All the links and stuff will be down in the video description, along with, again, the video for part 1 of this book and the video for the LeBrant abortion documentary response that I made. And I think, yeah, that's it. That's me done for now, I think. Thank you. I'm a little overwhelmed at the minute. I've not been having a good couple of weeks. I've been very stressed. I've been very, my mood's not good. This is never a good time of year for me. And I'm having that yearly, crisis of confidence where I'm like, oh, I should just quit this job and go live in a cave somewhere with Kyra. We'll just do nothing all day and live in a cave and be cave people. So that's where I'm at. I'm trying to work through it because it's just one of those things, a big... So I took some time off last week that I couldn't really afford to take, but I think I needed for the sake of my head. And now I'm trying to get some work done again, so we'll see how it goes. But thank you all for your patience during that time and while I was just kind of off social media for a bit. And thank you for watching this video today, and thank you for your continued support, and I appreciate you a lot. And yeah, I'll see you again soon. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.